In 2021, Putin was terrified of a man who claimed to be a shaman, a traditional Siberian healer. The man wanted to come and expel the demons from the Kremlin, and Putin arrested him just when the man started his march to Moscow. Superstitious beliefs, irrational thinking is very typical for the delusional Russia, and it becomes particularly strong just before the collapse. Let's have a look at the history. Rasputin was very responsible for the collapse of the Russian Empire. Then, the end of the USSR was marked by the super popularity of Kashpirovsky, a hypnoticist who had prime time on all Soviet TV channels. And right now we have Putin, who has his own shamans and is deadly terrified of another independent marching to the Kremlin. My name is Anna, and I am from Ukraine. I was born just before the collapse of the USSR, and now I invite you to observe and analyze the collapse of the Russian Federation. Subscribe to understand more about this important historical moment. Grigory Rasputin was the great friend of the Russian Tsar family. Just another devil in the palace. Rasputin was born in 1869 in Siberia, and after a pilgrimage decided he is a monk and a sacred man. But in this Russian understanding of a monk, because he held no serious positions in Russian Orthodox Church, he was married, had lots of children, and was described by his friends as a sex machine. Yes, people claimed he had a lot of lovers, including that Tsarina Alexandra. In 1905, Rasputin traveled to St. Petersburg, became super popular there, and finally met the couple. Russian Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra were a very troubled couple. They had lots of problems and decided to hire Rasputin as their face healer. First of all, they had serious troubles with their son, Alexei, who had hemophilia. But secondly, they disliked the processes that were happening in Russia. Russia has its own special way. Rasputin kept repeating, and now Putin repeats this phrase. This is the Russian vision of the Ruski Mir. Tsar Nicholas II loved authoritarian rule. He hated aristocrats who traveled the world and brought liberal ideas back to Mother Russia. That's why in a couple of conversations he became a huge fan of Rasputin, an educated peasant man who was very patriarchal in his attitudes. With each month, Rasputin gained more and more influence over the Tsar family. And in 1915, when because of the First World War Nicholas left St. Petersburg, Rasputin ruled the country together with Tsarina Alexandra. Of course, aristocracy did not like that and often described Rasputin as dark powers around the Russian throne. Well, Russian throne itself is a very dark place. Uneducated, inexperienced mystic Rasputin approved or disapproved any state decision in the Russian Empire. He was responsible for appointing or hiring ministers, and of course people hated him. That's why in 1916 a coup of Russian aristocrats killed Rasputin, and his body was destroyed during 1917 revolution. Rasputin, before his death, before his assassination, kept repeating to the Tsar family that if something would happen to him, this would end their dynasty. Well, I don't think it's magic or prophecy. Perhaps his presence in their family as a friend, as a lover, as an influencer was already a sign of its total decline. During most of the USSR history, there were no mystics. You don't need them when the country is run by devils. Remember to subscribe to expel the demons from the Kremlin. And it is only in the 90s and 80s, just before the collapse of the USSR, that some of such people start appearing. 80s and 90s are known as the period of perestroika. In reality, this was time of huge queues, collapsing economy, Chernobyl disaster, Afghanistan, and it was obvious, it was in the air that the USSR is dying. Could you see the information about all of these problems, about the approaching dissolution on the TV? Of course not, because Russia is always the land of deceit and propaganda. Instead, all of the TV channels broadcast new celebrities, extrasensory healers and hypnoticists and psychics like Kashpirovsky, Chumak. They were given prime time on central TV channels, and it was literally a nationwide phenomenon. It was not that someone is interested in this kind of information. No, such sessions, psychic sessions, were broadcast in prime time. I remember this period already. The streets were empty, and from the open windows of the flats, you could hear hypnotic voices giving very weird advice. Personally, I was 4 or 5 when Kashpirovsky was a superstar, and I never liked watching his programs. I felt bad, and my relatives took it as a sign. Perhaps he is a dark power. Highly educated population of the USSR, or at least it was claimed to be highly educated, was listening carefully to the hypnotic orders of Kashpirovsky, who could heal everything, starting from minor problems like high blood pressure and finishing with the operations performed live, broadcast live, without anesthesia. Anatoly Kashpirovsky was at least a doctor, a psychiatrist, but another psychic, another celebrity was Alan Chumak, who was a journalist and claimed to charge water and creams that you apply on your face, so that drinking this water or applying this cream, you will become healthy and invincible. Millions of Soviet citizens watched these TV programs, particularly every evening in prime time. Millions of Soviet citizens visited their performances. Yes, Soviet psychics. Sounds funny already, right? Soviet psychics went on tours and they collected crowds. Thousands, hundreds of thousands visited them and demonstrated how vulnerable they were performing all of the commands. They lost control over their body. They were healed. They were confident that Kashpirovsky, Chumak can change everything in their personal life and in the life of the dying empire. Very logical, right? Taking into account that Soviet Union followed godless philosophy. People were supposed not to believe in anything extraordinary. And here you had millions of Soviet citizens easily manipulated to behave like a crazy crowd. You may say, crazy periods happen in any country. It was the collapse of the USSR. It all passed away. But no. In 1993, in the independent Russian Federation, Anatoly Kashpirovsky, the psychic from the TV program, became a deputy of their parliament, Duma. He was elected from LDPR party, a crazy party led by another psychic, Zhirinovsky. Well, I'm joking here, he was not a psychic, but he was definitely a person who introduced Russia to the Ruski Mir concept. Do you think that all of these extrasensory shows ended with the end of the USSR? Oh no! Kashpirovsky and Chumak had an heir, Grigory Grabovoy, who said he is a healer. He later became the head of a sect, but he also created one of the most awful deceptions I can think of. In 2004, an awful terror happened in Beslan, where lots of civilians were killed, including 186 children at school. And Grabovoy, claimed that he can resurrect these children. And desperate mothers of the victims visited him, and he persuaded that he successfully resurrected the children, but in different bodies. And now it is the task of these desperate mothers to recognize the child anywhere on the planet. Insane. Later, Grabovoy was arrested, and now he left Russia for Serbia and continues his healing charlatan activities. Okay, this was the basics of the Russian magical thinking. And now I have a question to you. Imagine a situation that a shaman, a healer, claims that he wants to travel to the capital of your country to expel evil spirits from your president or prime minister. What will be the reaction? Please mind that the man is unarmed, he is walking just with a dog, he is not an experienced politician, he is of no danger at all. What would be the reaction of your president? Most likely, none. When I try to visualize something similar happening in Kyiv, let's say with Zelensky, I know that no reaction would follow. Perhaps this shaman could reach Kyiv, spend some time near the presidential office, people would film him on Instagram and TikTok, and that's it. Because it's not serious, because it's funny, because in Russia, the situation took a totally different turn, and all because Putin is deadly afraid to lose his power. Shaman Gabyshev was arrested. 50 policemen broke into his tiny apartment, and later he was charged with violence against this policeman and put into involuntary confinement into psychiatric clinic. But he is also recognized as a victim of political prosecution. His case sparked condemnation of the political abuse of psychiatry in Russia. By the way, this is a very dangerous and a very common tendency since the times of the USSR. Let me know in the comments below, would you like a separate video on this very complex and very dark topic? And right now, I want to quote Amnesty International, which stated that Gabyshev was sentenced to indefinite, compulsory intensive psychiatric treatment solely for peacefully exercising his right to freedom of expression. There was no danger to Putin at all, and all of this case looks very pathetic, but not for the Kremlin dictator. So who is this shaman from Sakha, Alexander Gabyshev? A philosopher, a healer, and perhaps a very clever man, because he spoke about the devil in Putin for years. First, he wanted to start a march in 2018 with the task to drive evil spirits from the Kremlin. Tell me he wasn't right. Actually, Sakha is 8,000 kilometers away from Moscow, so it would take him long to march in that direction, but he was immediately arrested. Every time he planned to go to Kremlin to expel evil spirits from the Kremlin, to make Putin to resign and, as he said, to return the country and Moscow to people, every time he was arrested. In 2019, he actually wanted to address to the International Court of Human Rights, because there was no danger behind his actions, just the words. In January 2021, Gabyshev recorded on YouTube that he wants to start another march to expel the demon from the Kremlin. Just a month later, he was arrested. 50 police officers broke into his tiny room and took him to a psychiatric hospital. This compulsory psychiatric treatment is just another way of very dark and very violent imprisonment in Russia. A lot of international organizations actually acknowledge Gabyshev as a political prisoner, and he was on the lists of political prisoners to be exchanged, but Putin does not sign the permission. Can you imagine how fearful Putin is if he deploys 50 police officers to arrest a man armed with just his face and a drum, and all of that 8,000 kilometers away from the Kremlin. Putin is desperate. He is afraid to lose his power, but he also understands how fragile his regime is. Let me know in the comments below, would you like a separate video about Putin's fears? And there are many. One of them is, of course, free and independent Ukraine and our armed forces. Remember to join the community of the channel. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming sponsors and patrons of the channel, and helping me film more of such videos. Thank you for standing with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!